Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Talking Stuff on the podcast. I'm Jeremy Birmingham. My co-host Andrew Ellis will join me in a moment. This week, we're going to talk about a handful of returning visitors to Columbus as the Buckeyes get back to the football grind this week against Nebraska. We're going to talk about the latest with Na'eem Offord, who visited Oregon and will be back in town this weekend, and a lot more on the next episode of Talking Stuff, which starts right now. Andrew Ellis joins me now on Talking Stuff. Welcome, Andrew. How have the last couple of weeks been? Obviously, people don't love when we do a little early show casual chat, but I personally think it's very important to catch up like this and just say, hi, how are you? How are things?
I'm doing well. No real problems, just watching football, the usual fall stuff. Our Bengals seem to be getting things turned around slightly. Still not.
How frustrating was that game on Sunday? Did you feel like I felt like they obviously they were up 21-6 heading into the fourth quarter, and it seemed to me like they played like they were up by 35 in the fourth quarter and didn't try to even score, except for when they finally decided to kick a 50-some yard field goal after just not trying to. They run the ball into the middle of the line 3 times. It's like you were only up 2 scores with 6 minutes to go. It felt very casual. Now maybe they weren't afraid of the Browns offense at all, but then Jameson Winston comes in and leaves them right to a score, and like, oh my gosh, come on, can we just put it away?
Yeah, they weren't handling things well. I think I'm starting to come around to your side on the Zach Taylor debate, slowly but surely. But I don't know. You and I don't hate the Browns. I want people to know that we feel strongly about the Steelers and the Ravens. So it was cool to see Nick Chubb score, though. I mean, that dude's a freaking horse.
Yeah, it was very cool to see him back. I mean, there's so many guys who go through major injuries that never make it back fully. And kudos to the Browns. I thought they played it smart. They didn't play him in the second half. Like they weren't playing for the playoffs in that game, I don't think. And then obviously you lose to Deshaun Watson and you sort of completely changed the way the second half was going to shape up. But I am looking forward to the Bengals and Eagles, the White Tiger game this Sunday, and we'll see if they get to 500 as bad as they played in those first couple weeks, or I don't know if they played bad, but Zach Taylor, I was just screaming at the TV, like, run the ball. You're allowed to run it. The NFL allows you to hand the ball directly to the tailback and let him run the ball sometimes, and they just refuse to do it in the first half. The offense completely bogged down. In the second half, they open it up and they give it to Chase Brown, and he has a 40-yard run. Like, oh, that's what happens when you just give it to the darn running back. Anyway,
you and Landis need to come up with a bet for that one. Like, loser has to take the other team's coach or something. Yeah.
It's unbelievable. It's really like, it's hard because I know that Zach Taylor coached the Bengals to a Super Bowl appearance, and I've realized that in my lifetime they've been to 3 Super Bowls, and I should like celebrate that. But like, the guy stinks. Whatever. So let's get to football. Ohio State football recruiting. The last time we did Talking Stuff, it was the week before the Iowa game, a couple days before the Iowa game. This is a Monday night when we're recording this and publishing this, so we're not going to do like a deep dive into the visitors coming to Columbus this weekend because a lot can change. Probably Thursday, I will send out a text on Subtext, and if you're on a Subtext, you can find out there. I'll have a more comprehensive list of visitors there. You can sign up using the phone number that's scrolling on the bottom of the screen. It's 614-662-4509 to join. You still can try with a free 2-week trial. We'll go a little bit more in depth on visitors, but we'll just start with the fact that the biggest visitor for this weekend, as of right now, as of Monday night, is Na'eem Offord. He will be coming back to Columbus with his family this weekend. His team, Parker High School in Birmingham, Alabama, they play on Thursday night. So it's a nice, it sets up well for the Buckeyes to get him in town for a noon game. I have talked to other players already on Monday who said they were not going to make it because it's a noon game. The fact that Na'eem Offord is a Thursday night game allows this to happen without much of a, conundrum for the Buckeyes. Obviously pretty important. The last time we saw Na'eem Offord, it was in Eugene. He was out there on the sideline talking to Dorian Brew and Trey McNutt and Brandon Finney and spending all of his time with those guys in Eugene while Ohio State lost to Oregon. He was out there, dressed as a normal kid. He wasn't wearing a bunch of Ducks gear or whatever and being respectful. But, the thing that people always ask, Andrew, like when a team loses a game is, what does this loss mean? What is it like? the losing team, especially in a road game like that, it does not impact a kid's mindset about recruiting at all from a perspective of how do you feel about Ohio State? Like nobody's watching that game and say, oh, well, Ohio State doesn't belong here, because everyone watches that game and thought that you watched one of the best 2 games of the season. And it's not really a negative for the Buckeyes. Certainly it's a positive for Oregon if you're there and the fans were awesome. But it is a really important weekend for Ohio State with Na'eem Offord coming back to town. Him and his family will be there. They will basically have the run of the place for the weekend. It's hard to understate how important this visit is this weekend for the Offords, don't you think?
Yeah, I mean, thank the scheduling gods for allowing this one to happen, I guess. It's funny because I've seen both Auburn, who is absolutely terrible, and Oregon writers claiming that their program leads. I have no idea what's true. I know he's committed to Ohio State. I know he loves Tim Walton. His family loves Tim Walton. And then we had last week, one time he tweeted something about how he wasn't flipping or something. And, does that matter when a kid says that on social media? I have no idea. I like that he's getting back to campus. That's a big deal. But I still think, and we talked about this a month ago, that weekend of the Iron Bowl and the game, that might be what ultimately tells the tale here. Do you still kind of feel that way?
I do. I honestly, and I may be on or in the minority. I truly do think it is an Oregon Ohio State battle, less Auburn. I think this is probably a case. Now, I know Auburn's no doubt making some very lucrative financial offers to Na'eem Offord and his family, but I'm sure Oregon is doing the same. And I know Ohio State is being competitive in the NIL space. I think that the Auburn visits are much more a byproduct of a kid who just lives right by there and is going to see games. And maybe I'll eat these words, and if I have to, so be it. But I don't know how anyone can watch that Auburn program and think they want to be a part of it. So I guess my belief is that you're seeing a player who is considering Ohio State and Oregon 2 of the 4 best teams in the country pretty objectively. And then you're seeing him consider Auburn, who just is an absolute dumpster fire. They're terrible. I have a tough, unless you're just absolutely buying the notion that you're a savior and you're coming here and you're going to be the guy that's going to reanimate our corpse of a program, then fine. I guess maybe I buy that a little. But I actually think, and I wrote about this last week, and it's not something I've voiced a lot, but I think it's important to discuss. One underrated current in recruiting that has happened in the last handful of years, especially when it comes to players from the South, is they believe, or they're taught, or they're told that the only way you can play in big time meaningful football games is if you stay in the SEC and play down South. And I think in some ways, the Ohio State-Oregon game, the way it was seen nationally, the way it's been perceived nationally since it happened, the way that it was viewed around the country is, holy crap, these are 2 elite programs. Like, no, outside of the Ohio State fan base, which is obviously and understandably ripped its hair out thinking about that game, nobody seems to be thinking that Ohio State was like a fluke or didn't belong there. It's just like, hey, these are 2 great teams. And I think with the current status of the Big Ten, with what's happening at Penn State, with the obviously Michigan and Washington playing in the national championship game a year ago, even though Michigan stinks right now and USC stinks, like there's I think the Big Ten as a whole, the perception of it has changed so much. And I think that Ohio State-Oregon game is going to go a long, long way in reminding kids or illustrating to kids from the South, like, you do not have to stay in an SEC program just to play in an SEC type of game, because you can play in the Big Ten and play one. And I actually think that's going to matter a lot. But to the original point, I still have a tough time thinking it's Auburn, despite how confident their media is. And again, I am very sure Auburn is going to do whatever they can from a financial standpoint to win that one. But every week that they lose games that in an embarrassing fashion, you have to think that it hurts their chances long term. So I think it's Ohio State, Oregon for Na'eem Offord. And again, it's pretty hard to understate how important it is for him to get on campus and to do so in a weekend where it's not a huge Ohio State recruiting weekend as far as commits coming into town. Like Devin Sanchez is not going to be there. I would expect Tavian St. Clair to be there and the local kids, but Riley Pettijohn, the 5-stars from around the country are not going to be there. And so it's an opportunity for Ohio State to really spend some valuable one-on-one time prioritizing the Offord family, which I think if I was to try to handicap what is being sold to him, is that you're not, you're still, you're 5-star to us, you're everything to us, but you're still the number 2 corner for Ohio State. And I think it's a good weekend for Tim Walton to be able to go out there and say, hey man, that's bunk. Like, you are just as important as anybody else in this class. And I think we'll see, because of some rumblings about maybe Lathan Ransom not being available this week, which is unsubstantiated, but I think you're going to see Jordan Hancock move around and maybe see some more Jermaine Matthews. I think it's a good weekend to see the Ohio State corners on display and their versatility. So I think it's actually a really positive that it turned out this way instead of visiting for the Iowa game. So there's a lot to that, but he's not the only one coming to town that hasn't been there in a while. That's Zahir Mathis, the 4-star defensive end commit from Ematep Charter in Pennsylvania, Philadelphia. He's been to Penn State twice, I think, since the last time he's been to Ohio State, and this is his official visit weekend. Pretty big, I think. More and more, we watch the Ohio State defensive line, and you realize, boy, they really need some game wreckers on that field. And I'm not sure if Zahir Mathis is a guy that I would expect to have that happen early in his career. He's got a lot of weight to gain and stuff like that, but just from a purely athletic profile, he fits what Ohio State's really looking for. It's an important weekend for him to get into town and see exactly where the priorities are for the Buckeyes, because I know Penn State is trying to push for him from an NIL perspective and saying, hey, we're going to pay you more than they're going to pay you. For a kid that's been committed to Ohio State for 10 months, I think it's pretty important for him and Larry Johnson and the rest of the Ohio State staff to sit down and say, this is where we see you. This is why we valued you for this long. And this is why, we took a chance on you early and went all in on you early. So big visit for him to come back to Columbus as well.
Yeah, that one's been kind of a strange recruitment. They've got a very strong defensive line class committed right now. He's obviously a big piece of that. But we've been talking for the last several months, like, how many times is he going to go to Happy Valley before he gets back to Columbus? And now that time is drawing near, and that's a big deal for Larry Johnson.
Yeah, it feels weird because here we are. It's again, we're going to be heading into the October 26th date against Nebraska. Ohio State has not been at home since October 5th at this point because of off weeks and travel. So you've got the game against Nebraska coming. The last time Ohio State was there, Zion Grady was in town from Alabama. But since then, we've seen London Merritt travel to Colorado and make a visit out there. That's another one. Like, if you look at this defensive end group, all of a sudden you have questions about London Merritt and what's going on with him. You have questions about Zahir Mathis. There's no questions, it seems, with Zion Grady, which I think is the one that people would originally have been worried about. But it seems like there's questions about everyone else on the defensive line. You have, again, Merritt and Mathis are both being told essentially by other programs, we value you more than Ohio State does because we'll pay you more. And Ohio State's approach and its rebuttal to that is the same as it's always been, which is, we're going to make you a lot more money down the road than you're going to make in year one. So stop worrying about the short term. But Colorado and, promising a lot of early playing time and all that sort of stuff is what's got London Merritt's ears perked up. But, you now have a defensive line class with Jarquez Carter, who is expected this weekend at Miami. There was a lot of talk about him in Florida when he committed to Ohio State. Almost immediately, Florida has fallen off. Miami has stayed involved. You are, again, questions about Zahir Mathis, questions about London Merritt. All of a sudden, it's a defensive line class that feels a little bit tenuous for Ohio State, but doesn't seem to be panic on any side of it. But it is that time of year where a lot of these recruits are making visits elsewhere. This weekend, Miami hosts Florida State. That is like a huge deal in the Sunshine State. So we'll expect to see Jarquez Carter, and I believe TJ Alford will also be there at Miami, which is not entirely surprising. Like last week, Riley Pettijohn went to Texas. But I think we all agree that TJ Alford in Miami is maybe like a slightly higher on the worry scale than than Riley Pettijohn in Texas.
Yeah, no, I'm with you on that. I would love it for him to not visit Miami, the one of the Florida Big Three programs that's actually in a decent place right now. Although I think they've definitely got some struggles too, even though they're undefeated. But yeah, I mean, it's just what it is. Local kids go to big games when their local schools are playing big games. So just got to deal with it.
And if I can, take a moment away from football and just talk about things that are important in life, like relationships and support. For everyone watching this, I hope you find someone who loves you and supports you and has your back the way ACC officials do Miami. But whatever, that's neither here nor there. They have just been bailed out like 3 weeks in a row. It is crazy.
Yeah, it's bad.
Anyway, so there's a lot of things happening, and I feel like we're talking fast and moving fast and trying to process a lot here. But again, we're not going to do a detailed visitors list at Ohio State this weekend, but Na'eem Offord visiting, hugely important. Zahir Mathis visiting, pretty important as well. He's taking his official visit. He is not the only official visitor visiting. There's also Damola Ajitahun. He is the Georgia Tech commitment down there at Duluth, Georgia, 2025 offensive tackle, 6'6", 290, making his trip to Columbus this weekend. He visited South Carolina, I believe it was on October 5th when the Buckeyes hosted Iowa. Still committed to the Yellow Jackets, but I think you're going to see Ohio State really kind of go all in here. I don't know that you're going to see a second visit for him. So this weekend is absolutely vital for Justin Fry and the Buckeyes if they can make a dent here. You're not going to look at the national rankings for Damola Ajitahun and be blown away by them. But I don't know. And again, I'm not an offensive line guru. I'm not a guy who watches tape of an offensive lineman and knows exactly what makes it perfect or not. But I see a big freaky athlete, and I think if you had to give me one of the two Georgia Tech offensive tackle commits that Ohio State has offered, Ajitahun and Josh Petty, and which one you'd want more, I think it's Ajitahun at 6'6", 290. Just a big bodied kid who it seems like he is just scraping the ceiling of what he can do, or just scraping basically the bottom of the barrel of what he's going to be able to do physically. So I expect Ohio State to go all in. They've got 3 commitments on the offensive line and have for a while, even though Javon McFadden only committed officially in August. It's been sort of that group of Carter Lowe, Jake Cook, and Javon McFadden. In talking to people over the last few days, it seems pretty clear they would still like to sign 5 offensive linemen in this class, and then maybe still look for a tackle or 2 in the transfer portal come December. But Damola Ajitahun is definitely circled as a primary priority for Ohio State.
Yeah, if Na'eem Offord is the most important visitor this weekend, then I would have this kid right behind him on the pecking order. You look at the size, and it looks like an offensive tackle, and how I'm sure the Ohio State fans are going to see offensive tackle and just immediately have their doubts, understandably so. But I mean, it's a big weekend for Justin Fry, so we'll see if he can change the way things have gone lately in these situations.
It's unfortunate that like Justin Fry is in a part of his Ohio State recruiting experience, I think, right now, where like if he doesn't land a kid like this, it's going to be really, really held against him on the recruiting trail, because yes, Georgia's involved here and trying to get involved. Yes, South Carolina's involved, but he's committed to Georgia Tech. He's not a player that has been all over the place. Ohio State has the ability to blow kids away on an official visit, especially kids who've never been to Columbus. And especially, he's been to Georgia again. But when he visited Georgia and took his official visit to Georgia, I don't get the impression that he was really a priority for the Bulldogs at that time. And I think Ohio State can separate itself this weekend with Damola Ajitahun. And the question then, I think, from there, Andrew, is like, where else can they go on the offensive line? If you have Javon McFadden, who the Buckeyes love, he is a nasty interior lineman. You've got Carter Lowe, who you believe and project to be a potential like all Big Ten level offensive tackle, a high draft pick offensive tackle. Jake Cook, who, from what I've talked to people, like they absolutely love what he's done on film this year. Like he continues to elevate. It's a pretty good class of offensive linemen right now, but just from a sheer bodies on the roster, you still have to get more. You were talking earlier about Na'eem Offord and maybe visiting for the Iron Bowl, but the Iron Bowl is at Alabama, right? So like it's probably unlikely that he goes to visit Tuscaloosa to watch Auburn. But like, I don't know that there's much conversation really with him and the Crimson Tide, and I don't think Kalen DeBoer is going to be in a situation or in a circumstance where he can just let somebody take a for fun recruiting visit to watch the other team. So I don't think that he'll visit Alabama for the Iron Bowl. I think what's interesting with Micah DeBose, a name we haven't talked about much lately because Ohio State is still very much involved there on the offensive line as that combo guard tackle type. Micah DeBose has a whole bunch of family in Ohio, right? Everyone knows that.
Yeah.
The Ohio State-Michigan game and the Iron Bowl is what day?
They are the same day.
Right, but what day is that?
What, like, specific date on the calendar? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah.
What is it? November? It's the Saturday after Thanksgiving. I don't have my calendar open in front of me.
So where do you spend Thanksgiving?
Family, holidays, families, all that stuff. I couldn't remember like if the bulk of his family was in Ohio or if it was like a second cousin or what that dynamic was like.
So what I'm positing here is that there is at least a scenario where Micah DeBose and his family will be in Ohio for Thanksgiving, and it will give him an opportunity to go to the Ohio State-Michigan game and not the Iron Bowl, and have a fairly good excuse to do that. You know what I mean? So just something to keep an eye on. I think it's important to watch. So if we're going to just break down the names to know as it comes to the offensive line right now, there's Demola Ajitahoon, who's visiting this weekend. There's still Micah DeBose, and there's a offensive lineman at Osceola High School in St. Cloud, Florida. His name is Connor Howes. The 6'6", 295-pounder committed to Arkansas right now. He's a 4-star on 3, a 3-star everywhere else, but he's a name that's been popping up in the last couple of weeks as well. I have talked to him a little bit. There's been some conversation with Ohio State, but it's really just getting started. We'll see. That's another one to keep an eye on. I know that there's been at least discussion with him about trying to get up for a visit. So keep an eye on that. And I would say this about Connor Howes, again, 6'6", 295. He is being recruited aggressively by Sam Pittman, the head coach at Arkansas, who is a pretty darn good offensive line coach. So to me, it's kind of like last year when I had mentioned Leroy Roker getting committed or recruited by Iowa. Like there's certain guys who, if they're recruited by this school or that coach, like it trumps the rankings and it trumps the offer list to me. And so Sam Pittman wanting this kid is something that has my attention perked on Connor Howes. So just a name to keep in mind if you see that materialize over the next 2 weeks. Because Ohio State, you get the Nebraska game this weekend, then you have the trip to Penn State, but in November, you got home games against home games against Indiana, Purdue, and Michigan. So there's an opportunity to get a lot of kids on campus in November that maybe we haven't talked about a lot right now. We know, boy, are we just cruising along here? Am I talking too much?
No, we are cruising along, but can we agree that if they do not flip Ajitahoon or the Arkansas commit, that they're in serious trouble? Like, is that fair statement, would you say? I mean, I don't see any other way to slice it.
Okay, but if they didn't flip either of those two and they flip Micah DeBose, would you still say the same thing?
Well, I forgot about DeBose. I guess they need to flip one of those guys for sure.
I would say they definitely need a 4th offensive lineman in this class. And right now, here we are. It's October 21st. There's only really those 3 names on the board of guys to watch. So if you're not able to convince one of those 3 at least to make the flip, I would say that's concerning. I think the goal is to get 2 of them, and we'll see if they can do that, because they still, like I said, would probably then turn to the transfer portal to look for a starter at tackle, or maybe 2 starting tackles heading into next year, based on or depending on what happens with Josh Simmons and his recovery and his rehab, because there's at least a small percentage, I would think, that if that, depending on the long-term prognosis for Josh Simmons and the severity of the injury and the timing of his rehab, if he's not ready to go and put forward a really good effort for NFL scouts in February, then I think that there's at least a world where Ohio State could have Josh Simmons back, and that would change things in the portal, but not change what they need out of the high school ranks. So I still think you're looking at least one more, likely two more on the offensive line. So in a class right now that's got 26.
Yeah, I saw some optimism on the South Carolina side after the Ajitahoon whatever visit, and if this kid goes to South Carolina, signs with South Carolina, and Ohio State can't beat out South Carolina for an offensive lineman, then I mean, throw your hands up in the air. I know South Carolina is not the worst recruiting team in the world. We saw what they did with Dylan Stewart, but I mean, that's
Nick Harbor. Like, I mean, yeah. But the reality is those schools are willing to overpay for a player that Ohio State is not. So it's such a weird catch-22 because you don't want to just blame things on NIL and say, oh, that's money, money, money. But a player like that who all of a sudden becomes a hot topic and a hot commodity nationally, there are going to be schools that are going to pay a lot more than Ohio State. So the value from the Buckeyes, the brand of Ohio State, the power of the Buckeye logo is what has to get Ohio State across that finish line, because they're not going to go out and overspend on someone because they know that there's a chance that they're going to be able to find 2 starting tackles in the transfer portal. So like, it's this weird catch-22 with how they're forced to react on the high school side of things, because no one at Ohio State believes that the smart thing to do is continue to overpay at every position from high school, especially when you have a class that's going to have Tavian St. Clair and Devin Sanchez and hopefully Na'eem Offord. Like, there's a lot of money going out in that class. So guys like Demola Ajitahoon, who are an under the radar type of kid, like you're hoping he's willing to take a little bit less so that he can come play at Ohio State and not have to play at South Carolina, who, again, good program and obviously playing well. But nobody in the country still puts South Carolina on the same level as Ohio State, right?
Yeah, you're right. I guess we'll see how the weekend goes and go from there. But yeah,
you gotta think optimistically. There's certainly an opportunity at Ohio State, and that's the reality. Speaking of optimistic, let's be optimistic. There's a chance, Andrew, that Jakeem Stewart, the number 1 ranked player in the class of 2026, who's now in the class of 2025, will be at Ohio State this weekend. I'm not going to say how high I think that chance is, but I feel pretty good about it. I think that he's clearly wanting to get to Ohio State this weekend. If he does, it does not impact the official visit that he wants to take over the November 30th weekend of the Michigan game. But I would say that's a pretty good sign for the Buckeyes if he can make it. That is clear. He does not have a game this weekend, even though he's not playing. Edna Carr is off this weekend. And there is discussion happening about getting him up to Columbus this weekend. I mean, I don't want to dive too much into it, but that definitely is conversation happening. So keep an eye on that for the weekend. If you're an Ohio State fan, that would be pretty big. I don't know that it's a situation where we'll get confirmation probably till Thursday or Friday morning. But again, keep an eye on Subtext if you're a subscriber over there, and we can talk about it then.
That'd be a big deal if he visits this weekend. Obviously, because he's got another, he's got the officials still out there. I was just going to sit here, and the pessimist in me was going to say, well, if he doesn't have a game this weekend, he's probably just going to go to Baton Rouge. But LSU is at Texas A&M, so Ohio State has an opportunity here. Let's hope that comes to fruition.
Yeah, well, the pessimist in you should be, stuffed down because he's trying to make a visit to Ohio State this week. So we'll see. This is one of those scenarios where it's the year 2024, and there's a certain way that you can do things, and schools around the country have no problem doing things a certain way when it comes to unofficial visits. And Ohio State is still pretty reluctant to dip their toes into all of the things that other teams are willing to do to get players on campus for unofficials. So you have to try to deal with the devil a little bit and make it work.
If it's Jakeem Stewart or an offensive tackle, I would dip my toes in that every single time. But I'm not the NIL funding person here either. So what do I know?
You know everything. We all know everything. But we all also know, like, it's the year 2024, and this is now the way the world works. So there are ways around things that used to make you feel dirty. Maybe they still make you feel dirty, but the reality is you have to do them. And so when it comes to getting Jakeem Stewart on campus, if you can get him on campus this weekend, and then again 4 weeks later, and signing day is 4 weeks and 4 days later, I think you have to take your swing. So we'll see if that occurs. I think that I don't want to say it's likely that he visits this weekend, but it's certainly trending in that direction. So that would be pretty big. Moving right along. I do feel like we're just churning through this show, but I'm not trying to. One player I don't expect to be on campus, I continue to see his name, is Anthony Turbo Rogers. I've seen him listed as an official visitor for this weekend. I've seen him listed as an unofficial visitor for this weekend at Ohio State. I still continue to believe he will not visit. If he does visit, and I'm wrong, fine, I'll own it. But I don't. I've heard from multiple people that they don't expect him to be there. So it's telling, not necessarily about where things are with Turbo Rogers and Ohio State, who the relationship he has with Carlos Lachlan is still very, very good. But I think there's a clear mandate right now from Ohio State that, hey, the two running backs they have are fine, even with Bo Jackson having a season-ish ending injury. Isaiah West continues to be very impressive. They love what they have with James Peoples. Sam Williams-Dixon has given them more than they expected this year. And I think you'll still see the Buckeyes look for a running back in the transfer portal as opposed to finding a third high school back.
Yeah, I mean, I would put every single egg I have in the Marquise Davis basket. Obviously, they've got two running backs committed. Bo Jackson seems to get hurt a lot. He's very good when he is healthy. Those times have kind of been few and far between, though, it seems like, for him, unfortunately. Isaiah West, I'm a big fan of his. No concerns there. I would just do what I can to get Marquise Davis. And the performance he put up last weekend, I can't remember what the exact numbers were, but that's
he had like 463 yards and 8 touchdowns.
Yeah, a kid like that
in 3 quarters.
A kid like that who is that good from Ohio should not be going to Kentucky. Kentucky is very bad, and I know Kentucky's had success recruiting in the state, but I would love if they could get that kid in the class. But again, you've got 2 committed, so seems unlikely.
Yeah, and you know the thing is about Marquise, and I've said before, I think he could be a really good defensive player as well. I just think a player like that, you just can't let out of the state, period. And it's happening. I have not been given any reason to think Ohio State is really ratcheting up the pressure to try and get a flip there. I know that there's been some discussion about, between Ohio State and Marquise Davis that's continued over the last few months, and as him and Carlos Lachlan have gotten to know each other better. But some kids just want something different. Marquise Davis could have chosen Ohio State when he chose Kentucky. So it's not like the Buckeyes were the ones turning him down or anything like that. So it is a situation where Marquise has to be wanting that sort of opportunity. And maybe he feels slighted by Ohio State. Obviously, the timing of the Tony Alford departure and the addition of Carlos Lachlan and the fact that they didn't have a relationship when Carlos Lachlan came over, all those things are relevant, and all those things play a factor in these discussions. But right now, here we are again, October 21st. I think it's Ohio State sticking with 2 running backs in the class. If Turbo Rogers shows up this weekend for the Nebraska game, I will gladly eat some crow. I think I would personally love for Ohio State to bring in a type of player like that, like the Eric Metcalf, the scat back type. We're going way back, Eric Metcalf. I don't know why I brought that name up out of nowhere, but that slot type of running back, the gadget guy, whatever you want to call him. I think you need one of those on the roster, and Ohio State doesn't have one. But as of today, I would be pretty stunned if that occurred. Let's move to the class of 2026 and quarterback, because Jared Curtis, the number 1 ranked quarterback in the country, formerly leaning toward Ohio State, then committed to Georgia, has now reopened his recruitment, citing the fact that he wanted to take visits to other schools and didn't feel right doing it while he was committed to Georgia. Immediately, names of schools that have popped up are Ohio State, Alabama, Clemson, South Carolina, Oregon, Georgia. It's like you decommit from Georgia and the next visit you're taking is Georgia. So it's not clear exactly why he's made that decision. I believe him when he says he wants to take visits elsewhere, but doesn't feel right doing it committed to Georgia. The folks that I talk to who are tied into the Bulldogs program tell me that they still think he's going to end up at Georgia, although the next time he commits, the NIL amount dedicated to Jared Curtis will be significantly higher than it was the first time around. And so if this decision is a play to increase brand awareness, I guess, then good for him. But Ohio State has maintained contact. That has not slowed down since he committed. Chip Kelly and him have talked pretty regularly. And so I don't want to completely throw a wet blanket over that smoke, because I do think there is some real stuff there between Ohio State and Jared Curtis, but I'm going to need to see him on campus for one of those games in the next month if I'm going to really believe that there's something percolating.
Yeah, I think it's safe to just assume he's going to end up in the SEC, whether it's back in Athens or wherever. Good to
Georgia,
know that
Oregon is one I've heard to be a little bit more aware of, but again, we know what Oregon does NIL wise. So
yeah, that's a valid point. But I mean, we've talked about Ohio State's search for a 2026 quarterback for a while, and it just doesn't seem like they have that guy, pinpointed right now. We've talked about some names. So I guess if it's not going to happen with Jared Curtis, and we'll see if he makes a visit, are there any other names surfacing? Like we've talked about the Bernard kid from Ohio. Is there anybody else that's on the watch list right now? Maybe names we haven't talked about before, or what's going on there?
The only new one that I think is somewhat interesting is Cincinnati Archbishop Moeller's quarterback, Matt Ponatoski. He, as of Monday, is now ranked as the number 8 quarterback in the country, according to on3.com. So that's a pretty big boost. He is not ranked nationally on 247 or rivals.com. So he just went all the way up to number 110 nationally on 3, which I know Charles Powers, the guy who does the scouting and evaluations for On3, and he's pretty good at his job. He's the same guy that was very out in front of Matt Zollers, the Missouri commitment, who's moved up into 5-star status across the industry. So it's one to watch. Chip Kelly was at Moeller last week and watched Ponatoski throw and work out. So they are definitely paying attention. Matt told me that he's been asked to look at the schedule and see if there's a game he wants to come to over the next month. So it's definitely a name to pay attention to. I want to go back though and say Jared Curtis, everyone was sort of, Ohio State didn't land the number 1 quarterback in the country in the class of 2026 when he committed. But it's just another example of how crazy the recruiting stuff is now. And it almost means nothing if you're getting an early commitment from an out-of-state kid that far ahead of time, especially a quarterback. There are going to be dominoes that fall. There are going to be things that change. And I'm certainly not throwing anything into the atmosphere that is based on reality here, but it's, again, October 21st. If by some twist of a knife somewhere, it's January 21st, and Julian Sayin doesn't like the way that it's laying out for him at Ohio State, or Aaron Nolan doesn't like it, or both of them, everything changes in the class of 2026 for Ohio State, right? So the Buckeyes are not being really considered as a viable option for most of the top 2026 kids right now, because everyone looks at the depth chart and sees Julian Sayin and Aaron Nolan and Devin Brown and Tavian St. Clair incoming. So the Buckeyes have backed off a little bit in the class of 2026 while their roster sorts itself out, but also while the recruiting stuff sorts itself out. And there's still a year plus until signing day 2026. So so many things can happen. I'm not going to sit here and rule out Jared Curtis or any other quarterback in the class of 2026, because if the roster situation at Ohio State found itself changing somewhat significantly over the next 4 months, unexpectedly, then everything changes in 2026. So it's I feel in some ways that covering recruiting the way we do, like we're invalidating our own work at times by telling people this doesn't really matter right now, but this roller coaster is just getting started in the class of 2026. So like it's hard to get too worked up about it. I think the best case scenario for Ohio State is a player like Matt Ponatoski or Nathan Bernard emerging and saying, hey, I want to play at Ohio State. I'm willing to go in there and spend a year or two developing. Ponatoski, I don't know if that's being pronounced exactly right. It might be Panotsky. I don't know. Ponatoski. I don't know. I don't know. What
I think that's right. Ponatoski looks right just based on the way I'm seeing it, but either way.
He's not a player. He told me he's not a guy who grew up like loving Ohio State or dreaming of playing for the Buckeyes, et cetera, because he's in Cincinnati. You know how kids down there are. Sometimes they're not really into the Buckeyes in Cincinnati. But he said that the school he's heard from the most is Kentucky, but in the last couple of weeks, it's really been Ohio State ramping up. So we'll see if the Buckeyes make a move there. But what I'm going to say about 2026 and Jared Curtis and everyone else is all pretty much the same, which is relax, let it play out, see what happens. Sometimes it's fun to just take a deep breath and let it all play itself out. 4-minute offense. Andrew will wrap up this episode of Talking Stuff with whatever questions you have.
Yeah, we'll keep it quick. I think we want to watch Marvin Harrison Jr. return tonight for the Cardinals.
Who are they playing?
They are who are they playing? Ravens or the Chargers.
So that's right. They're doing the exclusive ESPN Plus game, so you can only watch it if you have ESPN Plus. Why on earth would you make an ESPN Plus game that only like a very small section of the fan base is going to watch, or the NFL fan base? There's another game on, and no one cares about the Cardinals or the Chargers. So, like, if you're going to do that, if you're going to have an ESPN Plus exclusive and it's not the Packers versus the Cowboys, then just get out of here. Like, that's the dumbest decision I've ever seen. No one's going to sign up for that.
Well, now I'm disappointed because I did not. I see that it is on ESPN Plus, so I guess I won't be watching it. So that's unfortunate, but
it's only on ESPN Plus, and there's another game on. No one's going to watch it.
Yeah, it's a good point. Another game that's a better game.
Cowboys, Packers, Raiders, Eagles, fine, but like no one's going to sign up to watch the Cardinals and Chargers. Come on, ESPN. Anyway, what are your questions?
So keep sticking with the quarterback theme, kind of. We talked earlier about Riley Pettijohn visiting Texas, not really feeling worried about that one. Brady Edmonds was talking about visiting Texas. Brady Edmonds, the 2027 quarterback, who's clearly the guy for Ohio State from the state of California. He did not visit Texas. Correct?
Correct.
Okay. So in your eyes, that's still the guy to focus on for that class.
Yeah. I mean, he visited Ohio State for the Nebraska game, had a great time. I think that there was at least a thought in his mind of wrapping it up at that point and being committed, but the Ohio State staff is definitely not pushing for him to commit anytime soon. Now, I don't think that changes really much about where the recruitment ultimately goes, as long as they continue to have the relationship they've had. I will say that Penn State, it kind of worries me a little bit. There's like this vibe out there in California with Troy Hoon committed to Penn State. These guys really love the Penn State quarterbacks coach, whose name is escaping me right now, but I know that he's a big fan of his. And I would just say that my concern would be if Edmonds and his family at all feel like Ohio State is playing the wait game, then maybe you open the door for someone else. But to this point, that is not really a concern. He has said all along he wants to be committed somewhere by the end of this year. There's still 3 months to go. He's still trying to play his high school sophomore season. He's already broken his school's touchdown career record, like as a sophomore. There's a long way to go. He's played fine this year, but he hasn't been like, from watching film, it's not like he's a completely finished product. I think that there's things to work on, but Ohio State loves him. They love his family. They think it's a perfect fit, but there's no reason to hurry. And again, even for a player like that who has ties to Ohio State and his family grew up rooting for the Buckeyes, like we just talked about Jared Curtis, like there's really very little chance of a player committing that early and they're not being hiccups or not being something else that comes up. So yeah, I don't know that it matters to commit at this point.
Yeah.
Just build a relationship. Make sure hey, you're our guy. We're yours. We're here for each other. But what does committing mean at this point? It's not like Ohio State is going out there and saying, okay, Brady, now you're our guy. Go reel us in the next group of 2027 commits. They have one 2026 commit. There's no like big value there.
Yeah, but those quarterback dominoes, when they fall, they're early and they can be pretty seismic as far as domino effects and stuff. But either way, last thing, this is just kind of a random question. I would say the odds of this happening are not in Ohio State's favor before I even ask you. But do you think Ohio State will keep all of the 3 to 4 to 5 names that we've been talking about who are what we would not call solid? I know you don't have to give any specific names, but we've talked about Offord, obviously, Jarquez Carter, TJ Offord visiting elsewhere, Mathis. Do you think that they will keep all of those guys?
I doubt it. And I'll tell you why. And it's because I think at some point people get annoyed of the games. You know what I mean? Like if you are a player who's committed to a school and then you take visits to other schools and then you get home and you go on social media and you talk to media and you tell people I'm locked in, I'm done, I'm not interested anywhere else. And then 2 weeks later, you're visiting another school and then you have to rinse, repeat. I completely understand that players have the freedom to do whatever they want. But I think at some point, from the Ohio State perspective, it becomes we don't really need this sort of drama. And now you add in the potential of a guy like Jakeem Stewart entering the class of 2025. And that changes a whole lot of stuff. You still have conversation with Malik Autry, the other Auburn commit that, we haven't really talked much about, who apparently told Bill Kurelic from 247/Bucknuts that he was 247, 24/7. 24/7. I got yelled at by people telling me it's 24/7, not 247. I always call it 247. I always will. I'm sorry. Who had told Bill that he was looking at maybe taking 2 visits to Ohio State in the next month. So I just think there is there's a chance that the guys are maybe playing games that they're not ready to win. You know what I mean? If you play games, eventually you find out. And I would just caution any of those players. If you're wanting to be at Ohio State, at some point you have to start acting like it, saying, I don't have any desire to be at these other places. So there's, 6 weeks till signing day and everyone's just posturing and trying to put themselves in the best position to get what they can get. But eventually you might get got, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I was going to say I did not think it was likely that they would keep all of those guys. I was hoping you would have a different answer, but
yeah, I mean, it's just statistically, it's not likely. I mean, I think that the odds. Here we are again. I keep saying it's October 21st, but it's October 21st, and Ohio State has had a relatively drama-free recruiting cycle, and has had the number 1 class in the country for months. At some point, there's going to be some turbulence, and so. The question is, and it always is, when you have that turbulence, how do you replace guys? How do you right the ship? And I think Ohio State, with guys like Malik Autry out there and guys like Jakeem Stewart, who you're recruiting out there, there's ways to make sure you're taken care of. And in some ways, in many instances, in each of those instances anyway, with Autry and Jakeem Stewart, if you replaced any of those current players outside of, Na'eem Offord at corner or TJ Offord at linebacker, you're fine with it. If no offense to Zahir Mathis or Jarquez Carter or London Merritt, but any one of those guys that gets replaced with Jakeem Stewart or Malik Autry, I don't think anyone in Columbus is going to shed tears about it.
Yeah, exactly.
So if you want to be a Buckeye, you should probably reinforce that if that's what your goal is. So anyway, thanks for joining us, everyone. We appreciate you watching. Hopefully, as you're not watching the Cardinals and Chargers tonight, because no one's paying, unless you already have ESPN Plus, you're not signing up for just this game. That's a guarantee. Nobody. There's another game on, they're going to have cut into the regular game. Be like, oh, this is what's happening here. No one cares. I'd rather watch Peyton and Eli talk about it, you know?
True.
Anyway, this is Student Talking Stuff. He's Andrew Ellis. I'm Jeremy Birmingham. Thanks for watching. See you later.